Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're digging into a book with a title that definitely makes you stop and think. Let This Radicalize You, by the organizers Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba. Now, that word radicalize, it can bring up a lot of different images, right? But this book, it's probably not what you expect. It's really an invitation to think in a new way about how change actually happens, especially when the world's problems feel just massive. So let's get into what the authors are really talking about. So, right off the bat, the book challenges how we usually think about the word radical. For a lot of us, it conjures up ideas of extremism. But the authors point us to this definition from the scholar and activist Angela Davis. They're asking us to think about being radical not as holding extreme views, but as a deep commitment to getting to the very, very root of a problem. So, this first section is all about that idea. We're going to explore the book's core premise. What does it truly mean to be radicalized? What's so interesting here is how this just reframes the whole conversation. The authors are arguing that being radical isn't about, just adopting some prepackaged set of beliefs. It's a process of analysis. It's like the difference between putting a bucket under a leak in your ceiling versus asking, okay, why is the roof leaking in the first place, and what do we have to do to fix it for good? The book shares this really powerful story from co-author Mariame Kaba's early days. As a young activist, she was full of critiques, telling other organizers everything they were doing wrong. And then one day, her mentor just cut through all of that with this one simple question. What have you built? And it just stopped her in her tracks. She realized she hadn't built a thing. That single question completely shifted her focus, away from just criticizing what other people were doing and toward the really hard, tangible work of actually creating something new. And that really is the central argument here. The book doesn't present radicalization as some fixed ideology you just download and adopt. Instead, it's a process, a journey that starts with these fundamental questions, like the one Kaba's mentor asked her. It's about a total shift in perspective, from being a critic to being an architect. Okay, so if organizing is about building, then the next question has to be, how do you get people to help? I mean, the common approach is to just show people all the facts and data about how bad a problem is. But the book makes this really fascinating case that this strategy, it doesn't always work. And sometimes it can actually do more harm than good. And you've probably felt this, right? We are just constantly bombarded with terrifying statistics about, climate change, social injustice, you name it. And the assumption is that if people just knew how bad things were, they'd have to act. But how often does that really work? The authors suggest that sometimes it does the exact opposite. This slide just illustrates that point so perfectly with a story from the scholar Ruth Wilson Gilmore. She talks about being at a high school assembly where this well-meaning teacher started off by telling the students this incredibly bleak statistic. But instead of sparking outrage or a desire to fight back, the warning just had this chilling effect. Gilmore watched as the students just folded into themselves, completely overcome by a sense of inevitable doom. They just shut down. And that's the core insight here. If the only role you offer someone in a story is to just sit there and appreciate the doom, they're probably gonna check out. People need to see a path forward. They need to see themselves not just as victims of a terrible reality, but as active participants, maybe even the heroes in a story about building a different one. So, what does a better story actually look like? Well, this leads us to the book's proposed solution. If facts alone aren't enough, then organizing has to be an act of imagination. It's about telling a more hopeful, a more compelling story. And the book gives us this incredibly powerful real-world example from Chicago. So for decades, a Chicago police commander named John Burge and his detectives systematically tortured confessions out of more than 120 black men. The fight for justice was this long, brutal process led by survivors and their families. But what's so fascinating is the shift that happened around 2010. Organizers started asking a different kind of question. It wasn't just, how do we punish this guy? It was, what would real, holistic repair for our entire community actually look like? And the ordinance they passed was just a remarkable act of political imagination. I mean, look at this. It went so far beyond just a financial settlement. It included a public memorial, a community counseling center, free college for survivors and their families, and crucially, it made sure that this history would be taught in public schools so that the story would never be forgotten. It was about repair, from every angle. Now get this, the book reveals that co-author Kelly Hayes, who actually worked on this very campaign, didn't even think they could win at first. The facts, the political reality, it all just seemed too daunting. But she joined anyway because she believed in the other organizers. Her story shows how the very act of working together, of telling that better story, can literally transform our own beliefs about what's even possible. So, we've seen this massive city-wide campaign, but the book is really clear that this work of building a new world isn't just about those huge, historic wins. It happens in small, everyday actions too. The authors call these defiant acts of care, and they're basically moments when people decide to put human life and well-being ahead of the rules, ahead of bureaucracy, ahead of just indifference. It's about a commitment to not abandon each other. And the book is just filled with these powerful human-scale examples. Like when the city refused to install life rings on a pier where people had drowned, community members just bought their own and put them up, technically breaking the rules, until the city finally gave in. Or after Hurricane Harvey, the big story was of neighbors in their own boats rescuing neighbors. Or something as simple but profound as meeting someone the second they're released from jail, with a phone to call family and a ride home. These acts take this big, abstract idea of building a better world and make it incredibly real and concrete. Now, the book makes a really critical distinction here. This is not charity. The authors argue that charity can sometimes create a power dynamic. You have a giver with power and a receiver without it. They frame these actions as mutual aid instead. And mutual aid is presented as a political act. It's based on the idea that our fates are all tied together. It's not about the powerful helping the powerless. It's about people working together because they know their survival depends on each other. Okay, so engaging in this kind of work and just facing the scale of the world's problems, it can be absolutely exhausting. It can easily lead to burnout and despair. And the book is really honest about that. It doesn't offer any easy answers. Instead, it ends by completely reframing the idea of hope, not as some passive emotion you just wait around to feel, but as a discipline you actively practice. The authors draw on the work of Joanna Macy to lay out this idea of active hope, and it's this really beautiful, simple three-step process. First, you have to be brutally honest about how bad things are. No pretending. Second, you figure out what you truly value, what kind of world you want to move toward. And third, you just take a step, any step, no matter how small, in that direction. And this brings us to what might be the book's most powerful insight of all. It argues that you do not need to feel optimistic to practice active hope. You can feel totally hopeless, you can be filled with despair or fear, and you can still take that next step. Hope, in this framing, isn't an emotion you wait for. It's a choice you make. It's an action, it's a discipline. And so ultimately, this whole exploration of Let This Radicalize You brings us to this one final question. The book suggests that instead of getting paralyzed by the sheer scale of all the world's problems, we can ground ourselves in this simple, actionable idea. We can't stop all suffering, but every single one of us can find a place to plant ourselves, some action to take, to lessen suffering for someone, somewhere. It's a question that reframes our role in the world, not as saviors, but just as people committed to this simple, defiant, and deeply hopeful acts of caring for one another.